American student, was killed in a black township by a mob chanting anti-white slogans.
She came to South Africa to make a difference and died for it. Amy Biehl wasn't a tourist. She wasn't a journalist. She wasn't here for a vacation. She was here to help build democracy, to fight against apartheid, not with fists or weapons, but with education, justice, and hope. But in a country still scarred by racial division and mistrust, hope can be dangerous. And Amy's life, full of promise, full of purpose, ended not in the halls of parliament or the safety of a university classroom, but on a dusty township road surrounded by the very people she came to help. Trigger warning. This story contains detailed descriptions of racial violence, mob attack, and murder. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You're watching Once Upon a Crime South Africa, where we uncover the darkest crimes, the forgotten victims, and the stories that shook our nation and the world. Please take a moment to subscribe, like, and comment, especially if you believe Amy's story deserves to be heard far beyond our borders. Now, let's go back to August 1993. Amy Elizabeth Biehl was a 26-year-old American Fulbright scholar from Newport Beach, California. Bright, passionate, and determined, Amy was a Stanford University graduate who had come to South Africa to study at the University of the Western Cape. But more than just studying, Amy was committed to anti-apartheid activism. She believed deeply in South Africa's potential for racial reconciliation and democracy. Fluent in Western Cape's indigenous language, isiXhosa, I apologize for the pronunciation, embedded in township communities, Amy wasn't an outsider watching from afar. She was on the front lines, working closely with groups like the ANC's Women's League. She wanted to help shape the new South Africa. But apartheid had not yet ended, and the streets were still charged with anger, fear, and blood. The day started like any other. It was a late winter afternoon in Cape Town. The sun was beginning to dip, casting a faint orange hue across the city. The air carried a tension, the kind that simmers beneath the surface in a nation on the brink of transformation and collapse. Around 4:30 p.m., Amy Biehl, a 26-year-old American Fulbright scholar, was finishing up her day at the University of the Western Cape. She'd spent the afternoon helping colleagues and working on a voter education initiative, part of her mission to support South Africa's transition to democracy. Fluent in isiXhosa and deeply integrated into local activism, Amy was no stranger to the townships. In fact, her fluency, her compassion, and her courage made her welcome in places most foreigners wouldn't dare step foot. On that day, she offered to drive 3 friends home to Gugulethu, a township located just outside of Cape Town, where many black South Africans lived in tightly packed homes and tin-roofed shacks. It was a community scarred by apartheid, poverty, and police brutality, and it was boiling over with political unrest. As she entered Gugulethu in her white Mazda 323, she turned onto NY 109th Street, a decision that would lead her into the heart of a spontaneous, volatile protest. Roughly 100 young men and women, most barely out of their teens, had gathered on that street. It was not an officially organized protest, but a spontaneous demonstration. They were marching, chanting, and singing struggle songs, revolutionary tunes from the apartheid resistance era. Their chants were raw, angry, direct, one settler, one bullet. A slogan of the Pan-Africanist Congress, more militant and anti-white than the African National Congress. For these youth, settler meant white South Africans, and in that moment, Amy's skin color made her a target. She slowed the car as the crowd surged forward. Some protesters recognized her car as she had driven down those streets before. She had spoken to some of them in meetings, rallies, schools, but it didn't matter. The crowd turned hostile. As her Mazda came to a stop, a group of young men dragged her out of the car. She screamed, in English and in isiXhosa, trying to tell them who she was. "I'm one of you," she said. She begged, she pleaded, she tried to break free. But the mob, now fueled by the emotional chaos of the protest, saw only a white face, a symbol, not a person. And symbols in mob justice are dangerous. The first blows came: fast kicks, punches, stones. She was knocked down, then stabbed. A blade plunged into her chest again and again. Still alive, she tried to crawl away. Someone picked up a brick and smashed it into her head. Blood pooled in the dust. The singing stopped. By the time police arrived, Amy Biehl lay motionless. The crowd had scattered. Her friends, who had been in the car moments earlier, were too far away to intervene. Amy was declared dead shortly after 6 p.m. She had suffered stab wounds to the heart and lungs and blunt force trauma to the skull. Her body was loaded into a police van. The car was abandoned. The township fell eerily quiet. News of her murder spread like wildfire, from Gugulethu to Newlands, from Cape Town to California, and soon across the entire world. 4 young men were arrested: Mlungisi Gerald Mtolo, Vusumzi Samuel Ntamo, Mongezi Manchina, and Nushka Nungwana. All were affiliated with the Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC, a group known for its more militant stance against whites in South Africa. In the US, headlines read, "American Scholar Killed in South Africa." The New York Times, BBC, CNN all covered it. This wasn't just another murder. This was an idealist, a white American woman who had committed herself to fighting apartheid, brutally murdered in the very community she had served. The attack triggered national and international outrage. US lawmakers condemned the violence. South African leaders scrambled to respond. She came to South Africa with open arms, and she left in silence. After the brutal murder of Amy Biehl on the 25th of August, 1993, her body was returned to the United States. Her funeral took place shortly after in Newport Beach, California, the coastal city where Amy grew up, surrounded by friends, family, and sunshine. Now that community was blanketed in shock. The service was held at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Newport Beach. It was attended by over 1,000 people, including family, friends, university professors, classmates, and diplomats. Among those present were representatives from the South African Consulate, ANC members in exile, and international human rights groups. The atmosphere was deeply emotional, but not angry. It was a rare blend of grief, pride, and compassion. Amy's father, Peter Biehl, delivered a eulogy that stunned many. Amy loved South Africa. She believed in it. She knew the risks, and she went anyway, not to impose, but to listen and help. He didn't speak of revenge. Instead, he and his wife Linda called for understanding, saying Amy would have wanted the cycle of hatred to stop, even in the wake of her own murder. One professor from Stanford said, "She stood for justice, and now she stands for something even bigger." Her coffin was draped in African fabrics, not the American flag. There were songs in isiXhosa and English, bridging the two cultures Amy loved. A copy of South Africa's draft constitution was placed beside her, something she had worked on as part of her voter education outreach. In the weeks after the funeral, Peter and Linda Biehl made a vow they would not let Amy's death be the end of the story. Instead, they created the Amy Biehl Foundation Trust in South Africa, dedicated to youth education, art and community development. The Biehls returned to Gugulethu where their daughter died and met her killers face to face. Witnesses, including one of Amy's friends in the car, identified some of the attackers. Community members came forward with names. Police investigations led to their arrest shortly after the murder, and they were charged with murder and public violence. It was 1994, the dawn of a new South Africa. Nelson Mandela had just been elected president. Apartheid was officially over. But the scars were fresh, and the justice system stood at a crossroads. Punishment versus reconciliation. At the heart of this moment was a high-profile murder trial. The state versus Mungezi Gerald Matolo, Vusumuzi Samuel Ntamo, Mongezi Mankina, and Nushka Nyungwana. The charges were murder, public violence, incitement to violence, and illegal gathering. All four were accused of pulling Amy Biehl from her car, beating her and stabbing her to death in Gugulethu on the 25th of August 1993 during an anti-government protest. The state presented a clear, deliberate case. Eyewitnesses testified that Amy was dragged from her white Mazda by a crowd of youths. One of Amy's passengers, a black South African woman, identified at least two of the accused as participants in the attack. Forensic evidence confirmed that Amy suffered multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma. Protest slogans heard before and during the attack, including "One settler, one bullet," were cited as evidence of racially and politically motivated aggression. The prosecution emphasized Amy's identity. She was not an enemy of the people. She was an ally. She spoke Isaac's Xhosa. She lived in South African townships. She was a scholar, a volunteer, and a human rights activist. But to the crowd that day, her skin made her a target. The defense attorneys did not deny that the men participated in the protest or even that they were involved in the attack. Instead, their argument focused on context. They claimed the killing happened during political upheaval, that the young men acted not out of personal malice, but as part of a revolutionary act, and that they were brainwashed by militant slogans and anti-white propaganda circulating at the time. But the judge was not persuaded. After weeks of testimony, argument, and public attention, the court found all four accused guilty of murder in 1994. The judge called the murder brutal and senseless, and emphasized that Amy was not an agent of apartheid, but a victim of a mob that had lost control. Each of the four men was sentenced to 18 years in prison, a heavy but not maximum sentence, given their young age and the political climate. The ruling was seen as a victory for law and order in a country trying to establish faith in its justice system. The South African press praised the trial for being transparent and fair. International media, including the BBC, CNN, and New York Times, covered the verdict in detail, calling it a symbol of justice in a fragile democracy. But beneath the surface, a deeper question was rising. Should punishment be the end of the story, or could reconciliation take its place? That question would soon be tested in the halls of a very different court. After serving just a few years, the four men applied for amnesty through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, a body created by Nelson Mandela's government to heal the wounds of apartheid. Their argument was that Amy Biehl's killing was a political act committed during a protest under the broader anti-apartheid struggle, not a random act of violence. Despite Amy being an anti-apartheid activist herself, the TRC granted them amnesty in 1998, saying the murder was associated with a political objective. In a moment that stunned the world, Peter and Linda Biehl, Amy's parents, supported the TRC's decision. They believed in forgiveness and reconciliation. They met young men. They hugged them. They even invited them to work for the Amy Biehl Foundation, helping uplift the same communities where the crime occurred. Two of them, Entamo and Metolo, later worked for the foundation, doing youth outreach and community development. They became symbols of restorative justice, showing that even the most painful acts can be followed by transformation. They were never rearrested or recharged. Under TRC law, amnesty was permanent.
After spending 3 years in jail, her convicted killers were among the first to apply for amnesty from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
File amnesty hearing into the 1993 murder of American Fulbright exchange student Amy Biehl begins in Cape Town today. 4 convicted young men want amnesty for stoning, stabbing and beating Biehl to death almost 4 years ago.
And so, we come to the end of Amy Biehl's heartbreaking, yet profoundly moving story, a tale of tragedy, but also of healing, forgiveness, and the enduring power of hope. Amy wasn't just a statistic, nor was she simply a foreigner caught in the crossfire of South Africa's political unrest. She was a passionate, driven young woman who believed in a better, fairer world, a world where justice, dignity, and equality were not privileges for a few, but rights for all. Her work and ideals brought her to the very heart of a nation in turmoil, where she hoped to make a difference. In a cruel twist of fate, it was in that same place where her light was extinguished far too soon. But even in death, Amy's story didn't end. Her parents, Linda and Peter Biehl, showed the world what true courage and compassion look like. They forgave the very men who took their daughter's life, not because it was easy, but because they believed in the kind of future Amy fought for. A future built not on vengeance, but on restoration, on reconciliation, on humanity. Their choice to build the Amy Biehl Foundation, and to even work side by side with their daughter's killers in the very communities once torn by violence, stands as one of the most powerful examples of forgiveness and transformation in modern history. It challenges us to think deeply about justice, about healing, and about what it truly means to move forward. Amy's story continues to live on, not only in the projects and lives her foundation has touched, but in the hearts of all who hear her name. It forces us to ask, what would we have done? Could we forgive? Could we turn pain into purpose? At Once Upon a Crime, South Africa, we don't just tell stories. We uncover the real people behind the headlines. We remember those who should never be forgotten. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue sharing stories like this one, stories that deserve to be heard. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have chosen forgiveness? What lessons do you take from Amy's legacy? Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious. This is Once Upon a Crime, South Africa.